Lost child, frozen king, the night was heavy with snow and silence when the Vampire King. Black carriage slowed at the edge of the northern woods, its iron wheels cutting shallow lines into the frozen road. And for Darius Nightborn, ruler of the Crimson Court, feared across realms, it was meant to be another empty journey filled with duty and nothing else, until a small shape stumbled out of the darkness and brought his world to a sudden halt, because standing thereunder, the pale snowfall was a little human girl, no more than 4 or 5 years old, barefoot in the snow, her thin dress soaked through, her cheeks red with cold and fear. And when she lifted her trembling face to him and whispered, "Sir, I can't find my mom," something ancient and buried cracked inside a heart that had not felt warmth in centuries. As guards instantly moved to surround them, weapons drawn, sensing danger, but Darius raised a single gloved hand and silenced them, stepping down from the carriage himself, towering and terrifying in his dark armor and crimson eyes, yet kneeling slowly before the child so he would not frighten her, noticing how she flinched not from him, but from the forest behind her, the place where her mother had vanished. And when he wrapped his cloak around the girl's shaking shoulders, he felt how fragile she was, how human, how alive, and the weight of that truth unsettled him more than any enemy ever had, because vampires ruled through strength and fear, not compassion. Yet here he was, listening as the girl sobbed that her mother had told her to run, that something had chased them, that her mother had stayed behind to protect her. And with every broken word, Darius saw images of countless human women he had ignored over centuries, maids, healers, servants, mothers always invisible, always expendable, and suddenly this missing woman was no longer just another mortal. She was someone who had sacrificed herself without power, without magic, armed only with love, and that act alone demanded respect. So against every law of his court and every expectation of his kind, Darius ordered his guards to turn back from the road and follow him into the Forbidden Woods, a place even vampires avoided after dark, carrying the little girl in his arms as snow thickened and the forest seemed to close around them like a living thing, whispering old dangers, while the child clung to him instinctively as if she sensed that beneath the cold exterior was the only being strong enough to save her, mother. And as they moved deeper, signs of struggle appeared: broken branches, dragged footprints, drops of blood staining the snow, and Darius's senses sharpened, recognizing the scent of human blood mixed with ancient shadow magic, something twisted and predatory. And when they finally found a torn piece of cloth caught on a thorn bush, clearly from a woman's worn coat, the little girl cried out, calling for her mother, and Darius felt anger rise like fire beneath ice. Not the controlled fury of a king, but a raw, personal rage, because whoever had taken this woman had done so knowing she was weak, poor, unprotected, exactly the kind of injustice the world allowed every day. And as distant screams echoed through the trees, confirming the mother was still alive, Darius made a decision that would change his reign forever, tightening his grip on the child and whispering a promise he had never made to any mortal before, that he would find her mother, that no creature would be allowed to prey on the innocent under his rule, and that from this moment on, the night itself would answer to justice. As he ran deeper into the woods, not as a distant king, but as a protector driven by a human woman he had not yet met, whose courage was already rewriting his destiny. The wounded mother of the forest grew darker and more hostile with every step as Darius Nightborn ran through the snow-laden trees. The little girl held securely against his chest while his guards struggled to keep pace, and deep within the tangled woods, the woman they searched for was still alive, though she had no way of knowing that the most feared being of the night was coming for her, because Helena, poor, human, and painfully ordinary in a world ruled by monsters, was pressed against the frozen ground near a fallen oak, her breath shallow, her side burning where claws had torn through her coat and skin, her hands trembling as she tried to stay conscious, reminding herself again and again that she must survive, not for herself, but for her daughter. even as the creature that hunted her circled patiently through the shadows, enjoying the fear, enjoying the chase, because Helena had been nothing special to the world, just a widowed herbal healer who gathered roots and leaves to sell in nearby villages, often mocked, often underpaid, often ignored. Yet tonight she had done something extraordinary. When danger appeared, she had pushed her child away and stayed behind, choosing pain over loss. And now, weak and bleeding, she dragged herself forward inch by inch, whispering prayers she was no longer sure anyone heard, until a sudden shift in the air made her freeze, because the forest itself seemed to hold its breath, the shadows recoiling as a powerful presence approached, and moments later, the creature stalking her let out a low, furious hiss and vanished into the darkness, sensing something far worse than itself had entered its territory. While Helena, barely conscious, struggled to lift her head and saw a tall, dark figure emerge through the falling snow, eyes glowing red like embers, a crown catching faint light, and for one terrible heartbeat, she thought death had finally come for her, that the stories were true, and the Vampire King himself had come to finish what the beast started. Yet instead of pain, she felt strong arms lift her gently from the ground, careful not to worsen her wounds, and a deep, controlled voice spoke close to her ear, calm and commanding, telling her she was safe now. And Helena tried to speak, tried to fight, tried to beg him not to hurt her child, but exhaustion claimed her before words could form, while Darius looked down at the woman in his arms and felt something strange and unsettling stir within him, because she did not smell of fear alone. She smelled of resilience, of warmth, of humanity that refused to break. And as his guards formed a protective circle around them, he carried her to a small clearing where faint moonlight touched the snow, laying her down carefully while Silas, his mage, sealed the wounds with controlled magic. And even unconscious, Helena flinched at the cold glow of sorcery, her body tense as if expecting pain. And that reaction angered Darius more than the creature that had attacked her, because it told him a silent truth. This woman had been hurt before, by men, by systems, by a world that took from her without asking. And as she slowly regained consciousness, her dark eyes opened and locked onto his face, fear flashing instantly as she tried to pull away despite her injuries, demanding to know where her daughter was, refusing to calm until Darius stepped aside and allowed the little girl to run forward. And when mother and child reunited in tearful desperation, clutching each other as if afraid the night would steal them apart again, the guards looked away, uncomfortable with the intimacy of such raw humanity. But Darius could not, because in that moment, watching Helena cradle her child despite her pain, he understood something he had never learned in centuries of power, that true strength did not roar or dominate, it endured. And when Helena finally looked back at him, not with terror, but with cautious gratitude, thanking him in a hoarse whisper, though she clearly believed she owed him nothing but survival, Darius felt the rigid walls around his heart shift just slightly, and as he ordered his men to escort them to safety, unaware that the creature in the woods had not been defeated, only delayed, he realized that saving this woman was not the end of his involvement, but the beginning of a connection that would challenge his rule, his beliefs, and the very laws of his immortal world. Because Helena was no longer just a rescued human, she was a reminder of everything the night had tried and failed to erase. Her hidden destiny, the journey back to the border fortress, was slow and tense, not because of distance, but because something unseen followed them through the trees. And although Darius Nightborn said nothing, his senses remained sharpened, tracking every shift of shadow and every unnatural silence. While Helena rode inside the carriage, wrapped in furs beside her daughter, weak, but awake, her pain dulled by vampire healing, yet not erased. And as the gates of the ancient stronghold finally closed behind them, cutting off the forest and its lurking horrors, Helena believed for the first time that she might live through the night, though she did not yet understand the price of that safety, because inside those stone walls, under flickering torchlight, truths long buried were beginning to surface, and as healers tended to her wounds, Darius watched from a distance, noticing the way her body reacted strangely to vampire magic, not rejecting it, but adapting, absorbing it in small, quiet ways that no ordinary human ever could. And when Silas quietly informed him that her bloodline carried traces of ancient protection spells woven into flesh and soul, spells older than most vampire houses, Darius felt unease coil in his chest, realizing this woman had never been as ordinary as the world had treated her, while Helena, unaware of these whispers, focused only on her child, refusing rest until she was assured the girl was warm, fed, and asleep. And even then, she thanked servants politely, flinching whenever someone raised their voice, revealing a lifetime of learned caution that spoke louder than any words. And later, when Darius finally approached her chamber, dismissing guards so they would be alone, Helena braced herself, expecting judgment or payment for the rescue, because nothing in her life had ever come freely. Yet instead he asked her name with genuine curiosity, listening as she explained she was a healer by trade, mocked by villages for refusing to sell potions at exploitative prices, punished by local lords for healing those who could not pay, and forced to live near the forest because it was the only place she was allowed to gather herbs without interference. And as she spoke, Darius saw clearly how injustice did not always come with claws and fangs, but with laws written to favor the powerful. And when Helena admitted that the creature had targeted her child, specifically whispering that her blood carried old light, Darius's expression darkened, confirming Silas's fears, because such bloodlines were rare and dangerous, often hunted by beings that fed on legacy rather than flesh. And when Helena realized the weight of what he was saying, panic rose in her voice as she begged him not to take her daughter away, not to cage her in some royal experiment. And that fear so raw, so protective forced Darius to make a vow he had never spoken aloud before, promising that no one under his roof would ever harm her child. That power existed to shield, not to consume. And in that moment, Helena looked at him not as a monster or a king, but as a man bound by his word, and something fragile yet powerful formed between them. An unspoken trust, built not on romance, but on respect. While outside the chamber, Silas warned that the creature in the woods was not finished, that it would return stronger, drawn by the same bloodline magic now safely inside the fortress. And Darius knew that protecting Helena and her daughter would mean breaking old treaties, challenging ancient enemies, and exposing secrets his court had buried for centuries. Yet as he watched Helena finally rest beside her sleeping child, exhaustion softening her guarded expression, he understood that destiny did not always announce itself with prophecy or crowns. Sometimes it arrived bleeding, unwanted, and human. And as dawn approached, casting pale light over stone and snow, the Vampire King accepted a truth that could not be undone. Saving her was not an act of mercy. It was the beginning of a war. And Helena, the poor healer the world had discarded, stood unknowingly at the center of it all. The king becomes her shield. The calm inside the fortress did not last, because power never tolerates imbalance for long. And as Helena slowly healed under guarded protection, whispers spread through the vampire court that their king had brought a human woman and her child into sacred halls, breaking traditions older than most of the nobles themselves. And while Darius Nightborn ignored the murmurs, focusing instead on strengthening the fortress wards and doubling patrols, Helena felt the tension even without understanding vampire politics, sensing it in the way servants avoided her eyes, in the sudden coldness of corridors that once felt safe, and in the way guards now followed her movements, not to protect, but to observe, reminding her painfully of a lifetime spent being watched and judged. Yet despite this pressure, she refused to shrink, continuing to help heal injured servants and guards with her herbal knowledge, earning quiet gratitude from those who had long been overlooked. And this kindness did not go unnoticed by Darius, who watched her earn loyalty, not through fear or authority, but through simple compassion, a contrast that shook his understanding of leadership, until the tension finally erupted when an elder lord of the court, openly accused Helena of manipulating the king, claiming her presence endangered vampire sovereignty, and demanded she be exiled back into the woods, a sentence that would have been a slow death. And as the court gathered expecting Darius to respond with cold detachment, he instead rose from his throne and declared that Helena was under his personal protection, his voice echoing with a finality that silenced the hall. Because in vampire law, the king's protection was absolute, and by invoking it, Darius tied his own authority to her safety, drawing a clear line between justice and cruelty, while Helena, standing at the edge of the chamber with her daughter clutching her hand, felt both terror and disbelief, unused to anyone powerful choosing her side so openly. And when the elder lord sneered that humans were weak and disposable, Darius answered not with threats, but with truth, stating that weakness lay not in mortality, but in the abuse of power, and that a ruler who preyed on the defenseless was unfit to rule anything at all. And this declaration marked a turning point, because for the first time in centuries, the vampire court witnessed their king place moral authority above political convenience, and the consequences were immediate, as enemies moved in the shadows, summoning the creature from the forest with forbidden rites, feeding it information and promises of access to the child's bloodline. And that same night, the fortress was attacked, not with armies but with darkness itself, shadows seeping through cracks in reality, walls groaning as ancient magic was tested. And Helena, awakened by the screams of guards, instinctively shielded her daughter, preparing once again to sacrifice herself if needed. But this time she was not alone, because Darius arrived like a storm, eyes burning crimson, power unleashed without restraint, as he stood between her and the encroaching darkness, fighting not just as a king defending his realm, but as a protector defending his chosen responsibility. And as the creature finally revealed itself within the courtyard, twisted and furious, mocking Helena for thinking she could ever escape her fate, Darius struck it down with ruthless precision, forcing it to retreat once more, but not before it revealed a cruel truth, that Helena's bloodline was bound to an ancient pact, one that made her more than a healer, more than human. And when the dust settled and dawn broke over shattered stone, Helena stood trembling yet unbroken, realizing that her life had crossed a point of no return, while Darius, standing beside her in the pale light, understood that protecting her now meant reshaping his kingdom itself, because a king who chose justice over fear could never return to ruling the way he once had, and neither of them would ever be the same again. A slow burn bond. After the attack, the fortress changed in ways no decree could fully explain, because fear no longer flowed only from the throne downward. It lingered in the hearts of nobles who had seen their king fight not for power, but for a human woman. And while enemies whispered rebellion, something quieter and far more dangerous was happening. Respect was spreading, and Helena felt it in the smallest moments, in the way servants now greeted her with warmth instead of suspicion, in how wounded guards sought her out, not because the king ordered it, but because they trusted her hands and her heart. And as days turned into weeks, she slowly regained her strength, though the scars on her body remained, reminders of how close she had come to losing everything. And during those weeks, Darius found himself drawn to her, not in dramatic gestures or sudden confessions, but in silence, in shared glances across candlelit halls, in the way she listened when he spoke of battles and burdens without fear or awe, and when she challenged him gently, asking why a king with limitless power had allowed injustice to thrive for so long. He did not dismiss her, but reflected, realizing that immortality had made him numb, comfortable, and dangerously distant from suffering, while Helena, shaped by loss and survival, saw the world with painful clarity. And this difference became the foundation of their bond, not romance yet, but mutual recognition, as they worked together to strengthen the fortress wards using both magic and herbal knowledge, discovering that her bloodline allowed her to stabilize ancient spells in ways vampire mages could not. And when a group of nobles attempted to undermine her by publicly humiliating her during a council gathering, questioning her worth and accusing her of seducing the king, Darius did not interrupt immediately, watching instead as Helena stood tall and answered calmly, stating that she had asked for nothing, taken nothing, and that her only loyalty was to protecting her child and helping those in pain. And her dignity in the face of cruelty silenced the room more effectively than any threat, earning her a quiet victory that even the king did not need to enforce. And later, when Darius found her alone in the garden, snow melting under early sunlight, he thanked her not as a ruler but as a man, admitting that her courage had taught him more about leadership than centuries of conquest. And for the first time, Helena saw vulnerability in his expression. Not weakness, but honesty, and though she felt a dangerous warmth stir in her chest, she held it back, knowing the cost of loving someone so powerful, while Darius, equally restrained, chose patience over possession, understanding that trust could not be rushed, and as threats continued to build beyond the walls, with rumors of allied courts preparing to challenge his protection decree, both of them understood that their growing connection was not a private matter, but a political one, capable of reshaping alliances and igniting conflict, yet neither backed away, because what had begun as rescue had evolved into partnership, and in that partnership lay the possibility of a new kind of rule, one where power served compassion, and where a poor human healer, once dismissed by the world, stood as an equal beside a vampire king, not through destiny alone, but through choice, resilience, and earned respect. Justice crowns the future. The final reckoning came not with surprise, but with inevitability, because when power shifts toward justice, those who thrive on cruelty always reveal themselves. And as rival vampire lords gathered at the border fortress under the pretense of diplomacy, Helena sensed the danger long before swords were drawn, recognizing the same calculated smiles she had seen from human officials who once exploited her labor and dismissed her worth. And this time, instead of shrinking, she prepared, standing beside Darius as an equal partner, having learned that her bloodline was not a curse, but a convergence of ancient, healing orders sworn to protect balance between worlds, a lineage that could calm corrupted magic and expose deception. And when the conspirators attempted to invoke an old law to seize her child and bind her bloodline to their control, Helena stepped forward before Darius could speak, placing herself between the council and her daughter, calmly declaring that any law built on suffering was already broken. And as the chamber erupted into outrage, her blood reacted, ancient symbols glowing faintly beneath her skin, revealing the truth of every oath spoken in the room, exposing lies, betrayals, and the secret pact that had summoned the creature from the woods. And faced with undeniable proof, the conspirators turned on one another, their power collapsing under its own corruption, while Darius delivered judgment not with execution, but with exile and loss of status, stripping them of authority and declaring a new decree that protected humans under vampire rule, enforcing respect rather than fear. And when the dust settled, silence filled the hall as all eyes turned to Helena, no longer seen as weak or human only, but as a force of moral balance. And in that moment, Darius knelt not in submission, but in acknowledgement, offering her a place beside him, not as property, not as destiny-bound ornament, but as a chosen queen whose strength came from compassion and courage. And Helena, after a lifetime of being underestimated, accepted not for power or safety, but to ensure her child and others like her would never be hunted again. And as dawn broke over the fortress, casting warm light over stone once ruled by shadow, the kingdom witnessed a transformation that would be remembered for centuries. A vampire king who learned humility, a human woman who reshaped power, and a world where justice finally stood taller than fear, proving that true royalty is not born from immortality or blood, but from the courage to protect the vulnerable and the wisdom to listen to the quietest voices.